Hello, everybody. This is GeorgeAnn Hughes, and this is the Byte Show. And we are really blessed to have Peter Lavenda with us. And as all the listeners know, he is a top researcher and author, and he's very prolific with his books. He has written a great trilogy, and it's called Sinister Forces, and you must get this trilogy. Sinister Forces, a grimoire of American political witchcraft. It is fantastic. And he has recently put out another book, The Angel and the Sorcerer. That's also a must-read. And also Ratline. That is a must-read. And you just, oh boy. Peter, you are a very special guest, and you have a very special knack for very precise research. And I think you and Joseph Farrell are the two top people in that area.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be in the same company as Joseph Farrell.
Oh boy.
I have a lot of respect for him and a lot of respect for his work.
Well, he does for you too.
Well, that's nice. We have a mutual admiration.
Yeah. Tonight I wanted to talk with you about this secret space program. And what do you know about it? And any breakaway civilization kind of thing?
Well, I was asked to participate in the conference in Amsterdam about 2 years ago now on just that very topic. And we had some pretty notable people there giving presentations, so I was happy to be part of that. And basically we covered all different aspects of the secret space program. My contribution happened to be focused on the space program and its political implications in the United States and generally globally, but with the focus on the U.S. And our space program in the United States began as a military program. A lot of people don't remember that or don't realize it, but NASA didn't come around until the 1960s. But before that, we had a space program that was really part of the military. When World War II was over, we were involved in building rockets, but they were used for military purposes, basically missiles. They were used to carry warheads. We weren't really thinking about going to space or going to the moon, except to weaponize space, probably was our focus. And it was the focus of the Third Reich also. The Nazi scientists were hard at work developing some of the most advanced space weapons technology of the time. The V-1 and V-2 rockets were the most famous. So when the war was winding down to a close, we had special military operations that went desperately looking through Europe, trying to capture and recruit Nazi scientists to help us jumpstart our own space program. And of course, we inherited Verner Von BRaun, Walter Dornberger, and so many others. In fact, photographs of the scientists we brought over under something called Operation Paperclip show you, 100 scientists or more in one photograph at Fort Bliss or at, the future Wright Patterson Air Force Base and places like that. So we started doing this in a big way right at the end of the war. In 1945, the Russians were trying to get scientists. The Nazis did not want to be captured by the Russians. One thing that we tend to forget, and I think that the Oliver Stone television series that's been running on Showtime these days tries to make us remember, is that World War II was really the bloodiest part of that war in Europe was between the Russians and the Germans. The Russians really were instrumental in crushing the Nazis, very much so. They lost 20 million people during World War II. So the Germans did not want to be captured by the Soviets. They did not want to be captured by Russians. So they much preferred to be captured by the Americans or the British. So they ran west to avoid the Russians. But the Russians did get a number of scientists. They did get a lot of technology. They did get a lot of drawings, engineering stuff from the places they overran. And we got the rest, basically. So we had all of these guys in the States. We were giving them basically visas. At one point, they were prisoners of war. But then later on, we started to normalize their status. And people like Verner Von BRaun, who, as we found out later, was an SS major, which is, not a small thing. The SS was considered a criminal organization. And if you belonged to the SS, you had to be denazified. You were automatically liable to arrest. But yet, in the case of Verner Von BRaun, we didn't arrest him. And General Dornberger, his boss, was not made to suffer any indignities either. All of these guys were brought over to help us with our space program. That was the beginning of what I call the secret space program in the U.S. In 1947, which is when the National Security Act was written, when we created the Central Intelligence Agency, that was also the time of the famous Roswell crash.
Yeah.
And so there was this flurry of interest in flying saucers and in weird space technology in 1947, and it was precisely that year, in fact, in June, July, and August of 1947, that we brought the most famous of the paperclip scientists to Wright Patterson Air Force Base, where allegedly the Roswell crash elements were taken.
Yeah.
So we have this strange confluence of events. We have the Nazi paperclip scientists in southern Ohio at Wright Air Force Base, along with the Roswell debris and everything else that had been taken out of Roswell that was being used for analysis. We had all these people in one place at one time. And, of course, it gave rise to a lot of speculation, a lot of strange ideas about, what was really going on. And that was in 1947. It wasn't much later that we had President Kennedy making his famous speech that we're going to go to the moon in the 1960s because we were all scared to death what the Russians were doing. They had thrown Sputnik up, the first orbital satellite. And we could see it. I remember as a kid growing up, people pointing out Sputnik to me at night in the night sky as it was passing overhead. That was very frightening.
Oh, yeah.
This was a Soviet satellite. It was passing over, major cities in America. So there was this panic had set in that we are not doing this fast enough. We're not operating quickly enough. And the space program mushroomed. I mean, it grew overnight because of Sputnik. It became crazy. And a lot of money, a lot of resources were put into it. And NASA was finally created in the 1960s. And one aspect of that is that some of the people involved peripherally in the Kennedy assassination got jobs with NASA after the assassination.
Oh, my
goodness. So we had Lee Harvey Oswald, who was working for the O'Reilly Coffee Company in New Orleans, Louisiana. Famous coffee company, actually. I mean, they're the ones who made this kind of chicory coffee, ersatz coffee or something. Anyway, he was working there, and after the assassination, suddenly all of his coworkers wound up with cozy jobs working for different NASA installations around the country. And these are people who were just basically clerks and, office people. They were not engineers. They were not very fancy people with fancy degrees. They were just, average citizens.
Yeah.
They all wound up with these jobs. And there were other implications too. There were other, connections to NASA, to the space program, having to do with the Kennedy assassination, which I always thought was very unusual. It just didn't make sense. I mean, it strained credulity that this would all just be coincidence, that all of these people would get these jobs working at Huntsville or working someplace, for the space program. But it was there, and the family, the Michael and Ruth Payne couple, that Oswald's wife Marina and their two children were staying with in Dallas, Texas. Michael Payne worked for Bell Aerospace, and the people on the board of directors of Bell Aerospace at that time was General Walter Dornberger, the Nazi officer who was running the space program at Peenemünde, for which Verner Von BRaun worked. There was suddenly this tight little nexus, this tight little connection between the space program, the paperclip scientists, the Nazi scientists, and oddly enough, Lee Harvey Oswald. So there were secrets sort of hardwired into our space program from the very beginning. And we have to realize that it was initially a military program, that it had a military objective, and that going to the moon was just an extension of that military objective. We were in a space race, and it wasn't a cordial race. We were racing with our avowed Cold War enemy, the Soviet Union, for who was going to conquer space, who was going to take it over. So there was this initial fear that the Soviets or some other country would conquer space and leave America defenseless. There would be missiles raining down on us from the heavens or something. So we went all out to build a very advanced space technology. But the problem was we were relying too much on our German scientists to begin with. And the Nazis did not have any particular love for Americans.
Yeah.
They lost the war to us and to the Russians. So there was a network of communications between the Nazi scientists on both sides of the Iron Curtain. So we had the German scientists working for us in New Mexico, who were shooting rockets for us ostensibly, but the rockets would have very bad guidance systems, and one rocket famously landed near the city of Juarez in Mexico.
Yes. No.
So here we are bombing Mexico, with German rocket scientists.
Oh.
And that was the beginning of what could have been a very nasty international incident. And we found out eventually that the Nazis we had working for us were basically sabotaging our program. And they were sending secret communications back to people in Germany and back behind the Iron Curtain. They were cooperating with each other, and they were doing what they could to stop us from succeeding. So when Kennedy became president, he suddenly got religion on that one, and he said, we're not going to, screw around with this anymore. We're going to go to the moon, and whoever's standing in our way is going to, be fired, is going to bear the brunt of the anger of the United States. So basically what happened was we got serious about the space program. Verner Von BRaun became our golden boy, a former SS officer who used slave labor from the camps in building the rockets at Peenemünde. And we're all one big happy family. And that was part of what I've seen so often in studying history, particularly in the last half of the 20th century and up till now, is that, we as people may be ideological. We may have our ideologies to the left or to the right, progressive or conservative, whatever you want to call it. But the people who actually run the shop are not ideologues. They are pragmatic people.
Yeah.
So we made use of Nazis. When they screwed with us, we screwed back with them. We made sure that we controlled the situation at a certain point. I mean, they made fools of us with the Galen organization that the CIA had hired to spy on the Soviet Union. They basically took us for a ride there. They were not that useful. A lot of the people that we hired from the Third Reich to work for us proved not to be very useful at all, deliberately not useful for us. And yet we did hire them, and we threw our ideology out the window. We had the Soviet Union as enemies, so we didn't care if we dealt with people who were essentially mass murderers. It was okay,
Yeah.
And everyone did that. It wasn't just the United States. Let's be honest. I mean, the Soviets were using the same, people from the same space programs the Nazis had. They lost so many people during the war, and they didn't care that they were dealing with the devil. Israel didn't care when they were dealing with the devil. I mean, as I mentioned in Radline, at one point, Israeli intelligence had hired, Nazi war criminals to spy on the Arabs. So you had a situation where ideology was for the masses. It was for propaganda. It's what you heard in speeches. It was on television or, today, or on the radio in those days, or in the newspapers. But what was really taking place was something far more pragmatic.
Oh, yeah.
Where people just made deals every which way. And they made the deals for money. They made the deals for power, for whatever they could get, or, through extortion, through blackmail, through through whatever means necessary in order to win, limited goals, in order to, the end justified the means every single time. And that's the world that we really live in.
Yeah.
That's not the ideal world. It's the world, though, that we actually really do live in. We live in a very pragmatic world, and our politicians are extremely pragmatic as well. So don't believe everything you hear coming out of Washington. Every kind of political speech, everything else. It's, that's not really what's happening, ladies and gentlemen. That's not really what's going on. If you're a student of history, you'll spot that right away, and you'll realize there's a heavy dose of pragmatism taking place.
Well, let's go to outer space, Peter. Do you suspect, or can you maybe talk about a shooting war that's going on in outer space?
You mean at the present time?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly what part of that you're referring to. If we've got spy planes shooting each other down, we've got drones, we've got spy satellites. We're arming space.
Yes.
We're weaponizing space to an alarming degree, and it's not just the United States. I mean, a lot of people are trying to get in on that action. We're not the only ones with drones, for instance. That's a misconception.
Right.
People think we're the only people with drone capability. That's definitely not true. As we learned about a month or so ago, when a drone was shot down over Israel that one of the Arab groups had sent up. So everybody's working on drones. Everybody is trying to weaponize space to whatever degree they can. So we're on the verge of a different kind of world that we're going to be living in very soon, in which the skies are going to be something like out of that TV show Dark Angel that was around about 15 years ago or so, in which you had little tiny robotic devices flying around taking pictures of everyone and spying on people and taking them out when necessary. That was science fiction back then, and it's become a reality now. We have that to contend with.
How much of science fiction do you think becomes reality? It just seems like they prepare the populace for things that are going to come along. And as far as the drones go, a German company has just produced, I think it's still in the experimental stages, but they've just produced a weapon that will shoot down drones selectively, high up, the drones that fly real high.
Right.
Now they can shoot them down.
Well, for every weapon you come up with, there's going to be somebody developing a defensive measure against it. I mean, that's just the law of nature, right? So every time you develop something that you think is going to be, the best thing on the planet, someone's trying to find a way to thwart it, whether it's in cyber warfare, space warfare, or just, regular boots on the ground kind of warfare. There's always going to be that kind of scientific development. Science fiction inspired a generation of scientists and engineers.
Yeah.
I mean, people that I knew, people who were engineers in various disciplines they had been inspired by science fiction, by Arthur C. Clarke, who was, not just a science fiction author, but, here was the guy who, created this concept of the geosynchronous orbit satellites, which eventually became part of our communications technology. People do, imagine things creatively, and then engineers get, put to work trying to make them reality. So we're living in an increasingly, what's a good word for it, where technologies are converging. Every kind of technology you can think of will eventually be brought together to create some new kind of technology that we haven't even considered yet. It's a dialectical move, if you can go that way. In other words, we build up to a certain point, and then there's a sudden jump in technology where it's a breakthrough. It's a paradigm shift. And as we're converging technologies now, biology, biological stuff, biometrics is becoming very popular and used a lot now. I cross borders a great deal, into foreign borders, and biometrics are now becoming used in countries that you would never suspect that they would have that capability, where you'll cross the border into Thailand, for instance. You get off the plane in Bangkok, and there's a camera that's going to read your iris, and you're going to have your fingerprints taken, as you go through immigration. And this is happening increasingly in a lot of countries around the world, where they're taking this biometric data, and they're storing it, and God knows what they're going to use it for later. Who knows what that database, how long that database is going to be kept.
Right.
The same thing is true in our own cities. We have cameras now, of course, taking photographs of our cars as we go through intersections, which means that they're taking pictures of your license plate. And this information is stored, so we know that at a certain time, at a certain place, a car with your license plate, was at a certain location. You start coordinating all this data. You start bringing all of this together, along with the biometric data, along with your credit card data, your health data, and all the other data. You're building a very good composite picture of you. You're practically three-dimensional now, to an intelligence agency. And we are contributing to this by actively participating in things like social media. So for those of us who find suddenly that we can't live without Facebook, and we can't live without Twitter, we're actually contributing to the loss of our privacy by doing these things. We are actually making it easier, not just for governments, but also for corporations to keep tabs on us. And it's not just a convergence of technologies then, it's a convergence of the corporation and the state that's also taking place, which is the definition of fascism. Fascism is when the corporation and the state cooperate hand in glove. What Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, but it goes even deeper than that. It's the military-industrial intelligence complex, and it's the corporate complex in general. It's not just industry. It's software developers. It's the health industry. It's all of the various industries. As the technologies converge, the entities that use those technologies are also converging. They're converging along with the technology. So what's happening is you're creating a kind of global database that any of these entities can use for whatever reason. So you are vulnerable to the abuse and misuse of this, because in order for us to go blithely along our way, we have to trust the people who have this information not to misuse it. And I don't know about you, but that for me, that ship sailed a long time ago. So.
You're not kidding. Oh my gosh. A very clever fellow in Great Britain somewhere is getting ready to launch a line of drone-proof clothing that will make you invisible to drones and all these cameras. And I really applaud this guy. I think that is the neatest thing since mashed potatoes. It's like the German company that's coming up with this special dual laser that knocks down high-flying drones.
Well, we're going to keep trying. As every time they develop a new, computer system, there's a hacker out there who's trying to defeat it. So we know that that's a very human, response to this. We also know, however, that this guy developing this drone-proof clothing is probably going to have his company bought by some secret organization somewhere, and that technology taken off the market. So who knows? I'm nervous for that guy, because there's a lot of governments who are not going to want him to be selling that kind of material. So it's going to be tricky. It definitely is going to be tricky. But shooting down a drone is not that difficult. It's just a plane like any other. And in fact, there's a delay in the controls. The people who actually fly the drones, who are actually controlling the drones in flight, are nowhere near the drone, when that's taking place.
Right.
That's the whole point, right? So they can be in the United States, and they can be controlling a drone in Afghanistan. And what that means, basically, is that there's a delay between the person, doing the controls. There's a delay between his system and the drone itself. So this window of opportunity exists for someone who wanted to shoot down a drone, and that's what they're trying to exploit. They're trying to exploit this time lag, where we think the drone is operating immediately. The guy, moves a joystick and the drone moves, but it's not really that fast. Communications technology being what it is, it's still a lag of some seconds before the command is executed at the drone level. So, there's still ways around the drone, but the window is very small, and it's going to require a lot of very advanced technology to stay on top of the drone situation. But that said, at the same time, there are companies developing smaller and smaller drones, which are going to be much more difficult to find and much more difficult to take out, because they will be very small and they will be moving very quickly, and they may be operating without a human operator. They could be operated by computer programs that are guiding it, much the way GPS systems work, but like a kind of an active GPS system, which takes over the controls of the drone according to a prearranged program. So that's going to be increasingly difficult to attack from the ground or from the air. That's going to have to be attacked at the cyber level. So all of these things are in development, and not just by us. The Chinese are very much involved. The Russians are very much involved. Middle Eastern countries are involved. European countries. Everybody's trying to get a piece of this action because, drones are basically not that expensive to make. Not that expensive to operate compared to other weapon systems. So there's a lot of people who find this to be a very attractive way to go, and that just spells a miniature disaster for the rest of us, who maybe in the next 10 or 20 years are going to have to deal with drones in our own skies, patrolling our borders or patrolling our cities.
They're already there.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
In some cases.
Yeah, we've got a drone base in North Dakota. There are drones already here in Oklahoma and along the border.
Well, I mean, where does that end?
Yeah, and what worries me more than the surveillance is the fact that some police departments are calling for these drones to be armed. And,
Well, that's the last thing we need. The last thing we need is an armed drone. Yeah, the drone surveillance thing is worrisome enough. I mean, that is a weapon as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, it is.
But when you arm them, I mean, you're just asking for trouble. You are asking for a disaster to take place. You're just asking for some crazy person in there, getting a hold of that joystick and setting off a few tomahawks or something, or whatever it is they're arming them with.
Well, they've proven that they can be hacked.
Sure. Of course they can. Of course they can.
Oh, boy.
I mean, it doesn't. Do we want to live in that kind of world? Everyone's screaming about, for instance, Second Amendment rights. Let's sit back for a second and really reinterpret or do something to the Constitution that protects, number one, privacy.
Yes.
There is a constitutional basis for privacy. It's the Bill of Rights. It says unlawful search and seizure, right?
Yes.
A search and seizure to me is equivalent to privacy. Unlawful search and seizure means someone's invading your privacy. They don't have to search your physical house. They can search your web activity.
Yeah.
Right? They can search your credit card, activity and all that other stuff. That's unlawful search and seizure, it seems to me. So we have to understand that there is a constitutional precedent for protecting our privacy, and we should start there. If we can start there, we might be able to get some traction to go after the other stuff, because we have got to do something about drawing a line where weapons are concerned. Police departments have drones. The next step, to a Second Amendment person is going to be, private citizens should have drones too.
Well, yeah, and they're not that hard to make.
No, they're not.
I
mean, if you were a kid growing up like I was in the 60s, there were, radio-controlled planes.
Right.
I mean, it's not that different. I mean, a little modification now with the computer hardware and software we have today, and I think it's pretty easy to build your own operating version of a drone, of a robot plane. I mean, why not?
Oh, gee.
So come on, it can be done, and I'm worried that my neighbors are going to start building their own drones in their garages or something, and then we have to deal with that situation and drones crashing because they're imperfectly controlled, or they run out of gas or whatever. The potential for disaster is just there.
Yeah,
it's like
how would you like one of these damn things to crash into your home, which is going to happen at some point? Oh,
it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've had private planes crash into houses all the time, and they're with humans at the controls.
Yeah.
What happens when a drone does that, and if a drone is armed, again, the potential for disaster is there. And nobody's thinking about this. They just want this technology so badly. And we've glorified it a bit, and that's part of our problem, too. We're kind of in love with this idea. And as I said before, I think on this show, I can understand it from a military point of view where we're not putting soldiers in harm's way. We're not putting our people in harm's way by using a drone. So we're protecting our people. And I can understand that motivation, to keep our people from getting shot at. But on the other hand, we're making the world a lot less safe for our people by flying these things around the world and shooting missiles, from the sky, and occasionally hitting the wrong people, or blowing up a wedding party or something. We're not making the world safer by doing that. It's pretty scary if you think about, you're a villager living in, up in the mountains someplace, and suddenly there's a tomahawk missile coming down at you from God knows where. That's some pretty scary stuff, and that's going to cause a lot of nightmares.
Well,
a lot
makes
of people.
a lot of enemies for us.
Sure it does. Of course it does, especially when we blow it, we make a mistake and we hit something we're not supposed to, or we take out, the so-called collateral damage. We take out, innocent civilians in the way. It's not a clean surgical strike when it's done that way, when there's so much collateral damage, So we have a lot of moral, ethical issues to consider. We have political issues to consider, military ones, and nobody's really asking those questions, except in a handful of obscure academic publications. You're not really going to see a big, dialogue taking place in our country on all of these issues. There's just a lot of knee-jerk reactions to it, but nobody's really addressing it and talking about it and talking about the implications yet. Look, we're not even talking about, guns, really. I mean, there was the Newtown, problem. There was Sandy Hook, which made everybody crazy, and everybody's talking about it. But we all know that give it a few more weeks, a few more months, and that's going to fade, until the next, disaster comes along, or the next environmental disaster comes along, and we start talking about climate change again. And we'll talk about it, That's about all we're going to do. It's not going to be a real dialogue. It's not going to be people trying to solve problems, or it's just going to be people screaming at each other. That's pretty much our political discourse these days.
Yeah, it is. Oh, boy. Well, as I understand it, Peter, they have got weapons in space right now that can vaporize an entire city. Well,
we have, we've had that since the 50s. We've had intercontinental ballistic missiles who could deliver nuclear warheads. And we have the multiple, independent, reentry vehicles. We have the MIRVs. We have all sorts of weapon systems that can do that now, even before we started weaponizing space itself. So Israel has their famous steel dome over their country, right, which is supposedly their protective systems. When I worked for the Bendix Corporation many years ago, we were selling really advanced radar and missile detection systems to the Pakistanis, who didn't really need them, but they liked them. So we sold them 4. We only had 1 in the U.S., but we sold them 4. We've been weaponizing space for a very long time. I mean, the famous Star Wars program, right, the Strategic Defense Initiative. I mean, that was the Reagan thing back in the 80s, where we were going to have missile systems that were going to protect the United States, and they were going to shoot rockets and missiles out of the sky. We have that capability now. We've been developing it for decades. And we arm satellites. When you have an armed satellite, that satellite doesn't have to shoot bullets. That would be kind of counterproductive, because by the time the bullet reached the Earth, it would be a piece of molten lead or something.
Yeah.
So what do they use? They use lasers.
Yes. Well, that's what I was referring to about vaporizing things.
Sure. Yeah, they have lasers, but even more importantly than that, they can do things to disrupt electronic communication systems.
Oh, yeah.
And that doesn't sound bad until you really think about it. You can disrupt electronic communication systems and take out a city just by doing that. Suddenly there's no electronic systems in that city. So there's no traffic lights and there's no street lights. Energy plants go down.
Yeah.
You can take out a city just by screwing with their electronics. You don't have to bomb it anymore.
Yeah.
Remember in the old days we talked about the kind of weapon that you could drop on a city that would kill all the people and leave the houses intact.
Yes.
We're talking about that at one point. We've gotten further than that. We can just take out the systems that we rely upon so much, and that will cripple any city. That will be just as bad as if you had dropped a bomb. We'd still be alive, but we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves. We wouldn't be able to eat. We wouldn't be able to travel from one place to the next. We would be captives of whoever then came in after that burst was set off. Once again, I allude to that old TV show, that old science fiction show of Dark Angel, where they posited a world in which that had taken place. So there had been an electromagnetic pulse that had taken out all the electronics. So the only people who had electronics was the government.
Yeah.
And the government used the electronics to spy on its people and to control its populations. And, we're close to having that become a reality because of our armed satellites, because of cyber warfare. And the drones are just window dressing and all of that. Because when it gets right down to it, a cyber attack will be far more serious than any drone attack.
Yeah. Oh boy.
So we don't have to vaporize it. There's no margin anymore in destroying a city or vaporizing a city. We're not fighting that kind of war any longer. We found that out. If we didn't know it before, if we didn't know it in Vietnam, we didn't know it in Korea. We eventually found out about it in Iraq, Afghanistan. We realized that no matter how much you pound a city into the Stone Age, it does not stop the threat. So you have to rethink warfare, the classical ideas of warfare, and destroying a city is just not profitable anymore. It doesn't get the job done for sure. It creates more terrorists than anything else.
Yeah.
It creates a homeless population, which is huge, and that is a breeding ground for more hatred and more violence. So what even people like Chuck Hagel, are very aware of and are talking about is using cyber warfare as the next stage in warfare, of taking out electronic systems, computer systems, communication systems, and taking out energy plants and doing that sort of thing. That will allow you to invade a country far more easily and more profitably than sending troops and demolishing actual buildings and disrupting infrastructure, physical infrastructure.
Well,
you don't need to,
Peter, they aren't hardening our infrastructure at all.
No, they're not. We are not hardened. We're ripe for the plucking.
Yeah.
I mean, every so-called advanced first world country is ripe for the plucking because we've ceded our authority, our autonomy to electronics. We depend on them to such an extent that we've forgotten how to count without a calculator, without a computer. We can't do basic things anymore. We don't know how to communicate. We use keyboards now so much. I think we forgot how to write a letter. So there's a lot of basic stuff that we have given over. We've let the computers do for us. That as soon as someone takes away our computer systems, we're screwed.
Yeah.
We will have to reinvent ourselves.
Oh yeah.
For a lot of us, that's not going to be pleasant. For people of my generation, not such a big deal.
Yeah.
We might actually look forward to that. But for the people that have grown up in the last 20, 30, even 40 years, that's going to be a real hardship. They're not going to know what to do or how to function. And ATM machines will no longer work. You won't have any cash.
Yeah.
The vaults won't be able to open because the electronics will be shot. Gasoline pumps. Remember those of us who've lived through hurricanes. know that a gas station is out of commission if the electronics are gone. You can't even pump gas.
Right.
So all these things, all the infrastructure will go down because of one clever virus or one clever worm or one cyber attack from, a foreign country or some foreign entity that, that has it in for us.
Well, there sure are plenty of them that have it in for us.
Oh, yeah, and they're growing every day, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, these are the things that I worry about. These are the things that concern me, not a bomb dropping so much, or any of the other things that you see in the movies. What concerns me is, the person with the keyboard, and an internet connection who could wreak far more havoc on a city, than bombs and planes.
Oh, boy, that's a lot to think about. And, young people, all this texting, they've got this sort of shorthand that they communicate in, and I doubt if most of them can spell a word.
Well, yeah. Anybody who's read the blogs anywhere knows that. I mean, people do not know how to spell anymore. They don't know grammar anymore. They don't know how to write a coherent English sentence anymore.
Right.
And these are the ones that basically you hear from all the time, right? They're the ones who have the most opinions about things. But yes, it's true. People are losing their ability. They don't read books as much as they used to, unless it's on a Kindle, unless it's on a tablet or something.
Oh, dear.
I mean, so this is sort of taking over. And for someone like me who's a book person, that's kind of distressing, but that's just what's going on. But what that means is that if there is an electromagnetic pulse, EMP bomb of some kind, some sort of weapon that does that, people will not be able to read a book because everything they have will be stored electronically.
Yeah.
The paper, the books bound in paper won't, they won't know how to use them.
And they wouldn't know how to read them if they had them.
Exactly. There was a very funny cartoon, maybe more than 10 years ago, which was very, prophetic, a video of monks explaining how a book works, to someone. Mm-hmm. And it's all done in, technical computer jargon, right? How do you access a book, how do you log on to it and how do you download the information? And it's just an actual book, and they don't know how to use it or how to deal with it because they've been digitized, to such an extent that they can't figure out, how to read the book. It was a cartoon. It was a video cartoon. But it's prophetic, because we're getting to that point. So, and I see people all the time on planes with their tablets, and the sad thing is they're not actually reading anything. They're playing Angry Birds, and they spend all this money for this device, and they're not more productive because of it.
Right.
To us, social media now is the new productivity. So it's sort of taken the place of actually doing anything worthwhile. And what I find is in the countries that I visit that are not as technologically advanced as we are, they are more productive. And they do find ways to use this technology in very productive ways because they value it, because there is so little of it. So when they get their hands on something like this, they really do use it as much as they possibly can to get as much productivity out of it as possible.
Yeah.
And then I come back to the States and I see how we're wasting that time and energy and technology in frivolous, trivial pursuits, so that we're not really, we have a smartphone, but we're dumber.
Yes.
We've ceded the intelligence to the phone, so that we don't have to be smart anymore. The phone is smart. And if we lose that smartphone, what happens?
Yeah.
And, if there is an EMP device, if there's an electromagnetic pulse bomb or device, if there is a cyber attack, people are going to lose their smartphones.
Yeah.
They're going to be worthless pieces of metal and glass, and how are they going to function then at that point? What are they going to do? Psychologically, I mean, not just in the world, but the psychological crush will be gone.
Yeah, they'd go cuckoo.
They'd go crazy. They would.
Yeah.
But we're talking about this in such a light way, but I believe this is a real problem, and it's going to become a real problem if we don't address that soon. If we don't get people back to where values are, to try to understand, what is valuable, what is really productivity, what is really creativity, and get them back in the real world a little bit, and unplug them, briefly, just so they could, smell flowers and see the sky, and try to create something of value, something that will last. Mm-hmm. Because the people in other countries are. they are using the technology. They are trying to get things done. They are trying to improve their lives, in tangible ways. And we're just playing Angry Birds.
Yeah. I love the way you put that. We're just playing Angry Birds.
Well, we are. That's all I ever see.
Oh, my goodness. Oh. Well, what do you think about the Breakaway Civilization, Peter?
Well, this is something that was brought up a number of times at the conference in Amsterdam in 2011. And it's like this. A lot of wealthy people are very concerned about their survival in a world which seems increasingly hostile to them, and a world that's increasingly dangerous. All these things that we're discussing sort of ad hoc right now are things that they have been thinking about very seriously for a long time. There's a lot of companies that do these kinds of risk assessments, and they're people who are looking at, how do we survive and how do we keep civilization going in the event that there's some nuclear attack, for instance, in the West, either in Europe or in the United States, as an example. How do we protect our assets? How do we live comfortable lives if 200 million of our fellow, citizens have been suddenly incinerated, right? Mm-hmm. So we know we have the technology for space travel. We know we have a lot of other technologies. Cryogenics is still being developed, is still being improved upon. All sorts of other devices for living longer, lasting longer, surviving long periods of time, or surviving space travel. This research has not stopped. No matter what the NASA budget is from day to day, private corporations are still involved in this, and they're being funded by companies, by organizations, by individuals. And I believe that there is a plan somewhere by some group of people for their own survival, a sort of Dr. Strangelove kind of thing, where there was an underground bunker or something, except I don't think it's underground necessarily anymore. I think that there is an idea that we can use space travel, the private use of space shuttles, for instance. Suddenly, everybody's got a shuttle. Everybody's developing space shuttles. Everybody is flying to our space station. There is this possibility of building more space stations, of other countries deciding to invest heavily in setting up their own satellites and doing all of this. This is not just the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, as it was during the Cold War. Now the Chinese have rockets and satellites. The French, rockets are going up out of Latin America from bases down there, from Africa, from all over Asia. There is this rush to develop the technologies that would allow people to live off planet if they had to, and to create essentially a breakaway civilization. There are people who despise the situation the planet is in now. They may be, racist or, ethnophobes or something or whatever, but they don't like what they see. They don't like what's going on.
Right.
And they're putting their money into these, what I believe are secret programs, where they're trying to figure out, what are our chances? Is it going to be possible for us to leave the planet? The guy who started Virgin Airways, is offering, seats on a space shuttle, to millionaires to take, flights into space just to see for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Branson is doing this. I mean, he's building his own, space shuttle, for trips out into space and back. We're going to see a jump in this kind of technology, I think, in the next 10 to 20 years, where you're going to see, quietly, unbeknownst to us, people were developing faster and faster means of space travel. Burying maybe or hiding not just food and not just water, but the other elements of what might make a civilization. The great books of the Western world or something. There might be some idea to hide all the things that they would need in terms of art, in terms of medicines.
Yeah.
In terms of, as I say, the essential things of food and water and all the rest of it, and so that they will live, safely after there's some major conflagration. The whole bunker mentality that we had during the Cold War. People were building bunkers in their backyards and stocking it because they were sure there was going to be a nuclear war. Those bunkers have all fallen into disuse, of course. The food there is all rotted. But there are still people who remember that, like I do, people of my generation especially, but younger people as well. And they are, revisiting all of this and thinking to themselves, what are we going to do? We have the doomsday people, who have been in preparation for doomsday, right? They're stockpiling weapons out in the West. They're stockpiling weapons and food and everything, and they're getting ready for some kind of conflagration. They don't know what it's going to be, but some sort of apocalypse that's going to come, and they're making preparations. But I don't hold out much hope for those individuals. I think that, the ones who are really prepared are the wealthy, are the elite.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be interested in saving the rest of us. That's
right.
If they develop that technology, that's going to be for them. It's going to be for them to escape and for them to survive. It's not going to be for you and me.
Right.
So that's the breakaway civilization as far as I'm concerned. It's going to be a bit like the old Ray Bradbury Martian Chronicles, It's going to be some people who are fortunate enough to get into a rocket ship, at the end and escape a planet that's dying. And I think there's a lot of scenarios that have been written like that. Certainly our defense people have come up with those scenarios. And those defense people later retire from the Pentagon and join private corporations.
Yes.
And they've seen those scenarios, and they know what the chances are, and they know what they have to do. And when they leave the Pentagon and they join a Halliburton or a KBR or a company like that, they're going to suddenly, start, directing some funds and some resources and some research and development towards perfecting those things so that they can survive. And they're going to get private contributions from very wealthy individuals to make sure that they have the first seat on the plane out.
Yeah.
So this hasn't been discussed a lot, but I believe it exists because why would it not exist? Why would these people not be concerned? Why would they not be developing, contributing money to this kind of research and development?
Right.
They'd be crazy not to, especially the multi-millionaires and multi-billionaires of the world. They've got to be thinking all of this. They've got to be making these plans.
Well, it's interesting, Peter, that almost every week now, dribbles of information come out. Oh, we have discovered an Earth-like planet with water.
Right.
And Mars has water, and don't you know the moon has water? And,
right.
They kind of dribble this information out, that there are other places that human beings can live.
Sure. And it's not just because we're interested to know if there's life on those other planets. I mean, the attraction is, number one, mining these planets.
Yeah.
For precious metals, for raw materials that we're going to need, because we're going to run out on our planet of certain things are in short supply. So mining is one issue, but also escape. We can call the breakaway civilization, the escape velocities, civilization. They're going to be trying to find a way to get to these places, to start sending ships out, to start sending probes, in those directions, and building basically a technology for travel. We still have problems in leaving our solar system. It takes, so many years to get from point A to point B using our existing technology, as far as we know. So, the moon and Mars are going to be the first on the list conventionally. And the moon and Mars do not have atmospheres that are particularly conducive. So there's going to have to be construction. There's going to have to be, life support systems that are built. But, we're going to be sending expendable people to do that.
Oh, yeah.
And once everything is up and running, it's going to be the elite that are going to be using it. Let's face it, we know it's going to work that way because that's the way it's always worked. That's the way it's always done. It's going to be a different kind of slavery, a different kind of servitude. We're going to be just so grateful that we're still alive and surviving. We're going to accept, horrible working conditions and horrible everything just for the sake of being able to survive another year, another 5 years or something. We're already giving up so much because we're scared to death of terrorism, for instance. We're willing to give up so many of our rights and privileges in return for security.
I don't see that we're more secure. Not at all. And I'm not willing to give up rights and privileges for anything. I mean,
well, we're not willing, but it's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so little that we can do at this point that we can even think about, because we, at the same time that we object to what's going on, we are contributing to it. You know, we're stuck. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a way out. You know, we're still going to be using computers and smartphones and the internet, right?
Yeah.
So we're still contributing to, for instance, the lack of privacy, which is the first big hurdle.
Yeah.
You know, once the government or any corporation knows everything about you, they pretty much own you. So there's that, you know, aspect. We're already giving away those things. We're giving away a lot in return for security. We're going through, you know, tremendously long lines at airports. You know, we're getting frisked. We're taking off our clothes practically, bending over and coughing, you know, for the TSA agents to make sure we're not carrying, you know, a bomb stuck up our rectum or something. I mean, we're going to go through all of this nonsense, you know, and we are going through it because we don't see a way to object. You know, if you go and object to a TSA official at the airport, you will be arrested. You know, you can't even joke, right? So, and you're told there are signs, you know. You're not supposed to joke.
I remember, Peter, when, you could carry a weapon on a plane openly.
Sure.
I remember those days very well.
I remember when you could carry a bottle of water on the plane.
Yeah.
Those days are gone, you know. So I mean, it's ridiculous. It's gotten to the point where it is ridiculous. The security measures are stupid. Let's face it, they are stupid.
Yes, they are.
They're designed to look for, not to look for the actual weapon itself. They're designed to look for mediums in which you carry the weapon. They're looking for the missile, not the warhead. In those terms. So they're looking, you can't carry water because somebody at some point used liquid, and brought liquid onto a plane that was combustible that could have been used for a bomb. You have to take off your shoes because some idiot, stuck matches in his shoes. All of these things, it's because somebody came up with a delivery system, and so now we're looking for the delivery systems. We have switched our focus away from the actual components of weapons to the delivery system of the weapon.
And
right?
I also hear that TSA steals things from passengers.
Well, I've heard that too. There has been some of that. There has been some cases of theft, or they've given some reason why you can't carry something on board a plane, and they take it, they confiscate it. And of course, where does that go? I mean, they keep it, right? They don't destroy it. They don't have a big ceremony someplace and destroy the confiscated water bottles. I mean, they're doing something with the stuff they have taken away. Sure, I believe that.
Yeah.
Why? But they're human. The TSA people are humans like anybody else, and if there's a way for them to make a few extra dollars by taking something and nobody knows about it, they'll take it. I mean, people do. These are people. They will do that. So by focusing on these delivery systems, we've lost the focus. It's like when I used to have to turn on my computer before I went on board a plane, right? Because there was a suspicion back in the 90s that laptop computers could be bombs. So the ridiculous thing was, when I boarded a plane with a laptop computer, as I'm going through security, I had to take the computer out and I had to turn the computer on.
Oh.
They had to see, the Windows thing come up. And for some reason that was okay. That meant the computer was not a bomb. Does that make any sense at all?
None.
If you're a bomb maker, I think you can get around that, can't you?
Of course.
But that's what you had to do, and it was so boring. And then I was overseas for a while, and I came back into the country, and I'm going through security again, and I take out the laptop again, and I turn it on, and the TSA agents jump me, right?
Oh.
They scream at me, "You're not supposed to do that. Who told you to turn on the computer?" And I said, "You've always told me to turn on the computer." "No, you're not supposed to turn on the computer." Well, I didn't get the memo. I'm sorry. I've been doing this for years.
Oh.
So they thought I was, pushing a button to blow something up. I mean, make up your minds, But this shows you the weakness in the system. There is no system. There's just
insanity.
It's insanity. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is, and I don't see it getting any better anytime soon. That is very worrisome to me, and I won't fly. I just won't. you know.
Well, the places I go to, I kind of have to.
I know.
I wish I did, because it's not fun. I mean, it is no longer an enjoyable experience at all. It is torture to go. It's torture to sit on the plane for so many hours in planes that have been redesigned to squeeze you in.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing has become torturous, with very mean and ill-spirited flight attendants and everything. And the whole thing has gotten just nasty. But the security thing alone, we're passively accepting this, because people tell us, well, we're making you safer. And so we have to say, well, it's making us safer, having a TSA agent with a 90-year-old grandmother,
Oh,
I mean,
vomit. God.
This is all making us safer. So we accept that. Oh, yes, we want to be safe. And so like sheep, we're herded into the plane, I mean, come on. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is stupid. The whole thing is just ridiculous. And I have no further words to describe it. But we've given up so much, and we continue to give up, and we're going to be asked to give up even more as this decade goes on, And it's not going to have anything to do with people listening right now are going to say, well, it's all the previous administration, or it's the present administration, or it's the next administration. The administrations have got nothing to do with it, let me tell you.
Yeah.
This is the breakaway civilization for us, are the guys who are calling the shots behind our politics. The people who are calling the shots as to what's really going on, with our intelligence communities and our military and our corporations. I mean, the real power is there.
Yeah.
A president can do so much, but the real power, things have gotten progressively worse, and we've gone through every kind of an administration. Republican, Democratic, progressive, liberal, conservative. We've been through the mill, in my lifetime, since Eisenhower, which is when I was born. Eisenhower was the president. From Eisenhower until now, we've been through every kind of conceivable political administration, and things have just gotten progressively worse. So to blame it on one group or another is not useful. You have to look at the system itself. And Eisenhower warned us about it.
Yes, he did.
Give him credit. Give that old guy credit, because in the end, even he couldn't take it anymore, and even he couldn't stomach it, and even he warned us against it, and we didn't listen.
Yeah. Well, when there's lucrative contracts available, it doesn't make, I don't think, any difference, Peter, if people do listen, because the so-called leaders do what they want anyway.
Sure. They will. I mean, and the contracts, that's part of life, right? So you're going to have senators and congressmen who are, fighting for the contracts for their districts, regardless of whether or not that's good for the country. The Defense Department is so bloated.
Yeah.
It is so huge. It's bigger than the next, 10, 15 countries combined, according to the latest statistics. I mean, we are the police state of the world. We've got huge numbers of troops all over the world.
And we're just now getting ready, or have already sent American troops into 35 African countries.
Yep, that's right.
Ugh.
And no one's asked us
right
about that. No one has said, hey, do you guys think it's like a good idea for us to do this? The American people haven't been asked anything. We're not asked about this. We're not asked about all the military adventures we've been on. And no one's asked us.
Right.
So these things are happening with non-elected officials, right? So you're getting people in the Pentagon and people in the intelligence community. And listen, there's a lot of really great people in the Pentagon and a lot of really great people in the intelligence community. And I'm not knocking everybody there. But that kind of environment breeds its own worldview.
Mm-hmm.
You start to look at the world through their lens.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're operating in a different category. You're operating in a completely different mindset than the rest of us. And it may be, security-oriented mindset. Once you get into that security-oriented mindset, you will do anything to promote what you see as national security, even if that means, destroying a village in order to save it, as they used to say during Vietnam, that famous, hideous sort of slogan, we had to destroy the village in order to save it. We've been doing that, right?
Yeah.
And we still do that. And we may find ourselves with people who are going to insist that they have to destroy the country in order to save it. And I think that's what's going on. There's a kind of national security mindset, that has replaced the idea of national security has replaced everything else, has replaced our values as a people because of this national security idea. And that's become more important than anything else. And that's what 9/11 did, for sure. But it was way in place long before that. We were doing that already during the 60s. The whole national security thing is not new. But it gained the greatest impetus it could ever get was from 9/11. And as I always say, that was our Reichstag fire. That's what in Germany, Hitler used the burning of the Reichstag, of the German parliament, as an excuse to take total power in the country. And 9/11 was an excuse to give the military-industrial complex total power. I mean, power over our lifestyle. And I objected to it. I resent it deeply. This is not the country that I grew up in. And you can't just blame the terrorists for that. You just can't blame Al-Qaeda for it, because that's really insulting. I mean, as an American, I don't want to believe that a handful of, fanatic ideologues on the other side of the world could have so much power as to destroy who we are as a people, to destroy our ethics, our morals, the way that we behave towards other people, the way we behave towards the rest of the world, that these people were capable of doing that. I resent that whole concept. And yet we bought into it. We bought into this idea that because we got attacked in 9/11, we better give up our security, give up our privacy, give up our rights as people, give up everything. Otherwise, the terrorists are going to kill us. I went through that during the Cold War, to the McCarthy era, with seeing communists under the bed. We saw that with, so many times over the last 50, 60 years that, it's just the same old sad song again. And you can't tell me that Al-Qaeda is powerful enough to destroy who we are as a people, but we're letting it do that.
Well, that's, oh boy, it doesn't make any difference what the people want. I really don't believe that it does. It's what they want.
Right.
They who are in power and who want to be in power. And that's kind of how I see it. And I don't believe that, Al-Qaeda was an invention of our own military. The word means something like database. And we arm the mujahideen. Look what we're doing in Syria, Peter. We're arming the rebels.
Yep.
I mean, it's disgraceful what we're doing. It's just
well, we're caught up in that. We're caught up in that mindset. We're caught up in the national security mindset, and arming rebels in Syria or Libya or any place else is an outgrowth of having armed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and it's an outgrowth of having armed, the South Vietnamese to fight the North Vietnamese, and having those guns wind up on the other side of the border.
Yeah.
It's just an outgrowth of everything that we constantly make the same mistakes over and over again, and it's always in the name of national security. So we go along with it, but it's really not. People are making a fortune out of this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I hate to keep on bringing up the same old bugaboo of Halliburton and companies like that, but that's true too. Let's face it.
Yeah.
There's a ton of money to be made out there, and we're complicit in all of this because the average person in the street has become hysterical at the thought of jihadis. And of as if Sharia law is going to be imposed in the United States at any moment. I mean, I listen to these people talk.
Oh, my God.
And it is just the dumbest. I mean, this has been a Christian, quote-unquote Christian country for so long. And, Christian law hasn't been imposed by anyone,
Right.
I mean, if it had been, there would have been, for instance, no Roe versus Wade. The Catholic Church was dead set against that. There would be no gay marriage, that's for sure. All these things are taking place, and yet there's people who believe that the Islamic fundamentalists, or the jihadis as they call them, are in imminent danger of turning this country into an Islamic camp with Sharia law as the law of the land. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yes,
but
it is ridiculous.
It's just stupid. And yet people are buying into it because they're frightened, they're scared, and it's easy to manipulate. People are too damned easy to manipulate.
Yes.
And this is what's causing the problem. People have to just wake up, not buy into the stuff that they're hearing, no matter who's saying it.
Right.
Just wake up, make up your own mind. Do a little research, do a little reading. Don't rely upon the internet, my God, because it's so full of crap.
Yeah.
Just try to, just try to learn. Pick a subject. Pick Islam as an example, right?
Yeah.
And study the history, in an unbiased way. Just try to figure out who they are, what they want. Who are Muslims? And you'll find out eventually there's every kind of Muslim in the world. They run the gamut from extremely moderate, extremely progressive, you might say, to the extremely conservative. You've got every flavor.
Just like the Christians.
Just like Christians. You've got, and just like Jews. You have Orthodox Jews, Reformed Jews, conservative Jews. You have the same combinations among Muslims, among Christians, among Buddhists, among Hindus. You have all kinds of flavors, all different kinds. You can't stereotype anyone, and yet we're so in danger of doing that all the time. And when we do that, we actually make ourselves less secure and less safe because we're operating on a false principle and a false understanding. And because of that, we are not being critical enough in our thinking, and we are leaving ourselves open to attack from people that we don't even know exist.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, because we're distracted by these iconic bugaboos.
Yeah.
The crazed Islamic militant, hijacking a plane. This is the new icon of evil, and we're so distracted by that, we can't tell the enemy that's living next door. We can't tell the enemy that's living in Washington. We can't tell the enemy that's living, in our
in the White House,
in the White House, or in our small town, anywhere. We can't tell anymore because we've been distracted. So what we have to do is just wake up, calmly, and try to get as many facts as possible. Read from every kind of source. Try to figure out what's really going on. Don't fall for the enemies that we're being force fed.
Yes.
Because we're force fed different enemies all the time. And we're expected to keep paying for it, paying for the wars, paying for all of this, and at the same time give up who we are as a people, give up our values, give up our privacy. And we think that's making us more secure, and it's not. Ladies and gentlemen, you're no more secure this way. You are less secure.
Yes.
Because you're ignorant. You're being willfully ignorant. You want someone else to do the thinking for you. And there's people out there who are just too glad to do the thinking for you.
Oh boy, you can say that again. And going back to 9/11, I do not believe in any way that Muslims had anything to do with it. Nothing. I think they were just the patsy, the fall guys. And I just,
Well, you may be right, but at the same time, it's, again, we shouldn't say Muslims had something to do with it, because if we're going to be consistent, then we have to say that, Catholics caused World War II, right? Hitler was a Catholic. Himmler was a Catholic. Most of the German High Command were Catholic. The rest were not Catholic. They were Lutherans. They were Protestants. They were Christians. We never say that Catholics attacked us, in World War II. And we never say that Buddhists attacked us on, December 7th, 1941, right? we don't say that was a Buddhist or a Shinto attack. For some reason, we don't do that, right? But on 9/11, it was Muslims. It was Saudi Arabians in that plane. You know what I mean? These were Saudi Arabians, our friends. Okay, so let's be reasonable from that point of view, and not just categorize the whole thing as a religious attack when it really was not.
Right.
But anyway, so let's say, go to your point. Okay, let's say these people were patsies, that they were being manipulated. I stayed away from the 9/11 thing deliberately because, in the first place, I saw those buildings go up. I lived across the river when they were building the Twin Towers. And I knew people who worked in the Twin Towers, and I used to visit the Twin Towers as they were going up. And then after they were built, I used to work in that neighborhood, and I used to hang out in the Twin Towers after work. I have a lot of associations with those buildings, going back, since they were first being built and until they were destroyed. So, for me, it's a serious thing.
Yeah.
So I'm very cautious about jumping on the bandwagon and saying it was a conspiracy. I have always been very careful to keep out of that discussion because I know I could be emotionally, swayed one way or the other, and I don't want to be, I don't want to jump on it one way or the other. I hate to believe, I would really hate to believe that our government deliberately had something to do with that because I have such identification with the towers. And, that said, I actually hated the towers for a long time. I thought they ruined the New York skyline, but that's another story. But I had so much associations with the towers anyway, and, through my whole life I had been very much connected to it. So if I were to believe that my own government brought them down with that tremendous loss of life, that horrific way of dying for those people, because it was a horrible way to go, then I don't know what I would do or how I would react. So I've been avoiding that particular type of confrontation. Although I've looked at the literature, I've read the conspiracy literature, of course. I have my serious doubts about Tower 7. That looked very phony to me.
Yeah.
There's no way you can convince me that was like a natural side effect of the other towers going down.
Mm-hmm.
None of that makes the least bit of sense. I've just witnessed just today, I watched a New York helicopter video of a helicopter that was in the air at the time the towers were attacked, and watching the towers from the helicopter video cam and looking at it over and over again and thinking, well, it really doesn't look right. Something about the story doesn't make sense just from looking at the towers
Right.
themselves, how they were burning at the top, and then suddenly, for no particular reason, the whole thing's come down. There's a lot there that doesn't make sense.
It
I agree.
was vaporized.
It's vaporized. I'm the first one to say, yes, it's fishy. It's very fishy, but I've stayed away from the conspiracy stuff on this, and I haven't written anything about it.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, I'm waiting for the last shoe to drop,
Yeah.
I lived in Kuala Lumpur at the time, and I lived in Kuala Lumpur when the attack was being planned.
Yeah.
It was first planned, when people don't remember, but it was actually first planned and discussed in Kuala Lumpur. And then it moved to Germany, and then the real planning took place in Germany, and then, of course, the flights were taking place here in Florida, and, of course, out west and everything else. So all of the guys were practicing flying planes. So I pretty much, lived or worked every place where this was, where the planning had taken place. And, my feelings are very complicated on this. I would really like to know what really happened. There's too much went wrong that day. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Too many coincidences. It became too easy for all of this to happen. And I'm a person who writes about coincidence. I write about synchronicity. I'm aware that there are forces, you might say forces at work in the world and forces at work in the universe that operate mysteriously, that it's not necessarily a conscious conspiracy of people planning something to happen a certain way. Sometimes it's a whole bunch of accidents that take place. And all of these accidents take place because there is something darker at work. There's some darker force at work that's manipulating it. So I remember very clearly that, that episode, that first episode of The Lone Gunman, that spin-off from The X-Files. That first episode showed a plane flying into the World Trade Center, and that was aired, in March, I believe, of 2001, and the actual attack took place in September. So, 6 months later, there's a TV show showing this taking place, showing planes flying into the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And 6 months later, you actually see it in reality. So there was something dark.
Yes.
There was some kind of connective tissue there between, subterraneously, between the actual events that took place and something else that was going on. So I'm still open to that suggestion because I've written about it in Sinister Forces, about the action of synchronicity, and how synchronous events reflect some darker agenda, some darker force at work in the world. So I tend to stay right back from the brink of jumping on the bandwagon and saying, yes, it was a government conspiracy to bring down the towers, because that would be heinous. That would be so heinous that I couldn't really stay an American anymore if I thought our government had actually brought down the towers.
Well, they've done worse things.
Oh, I know, but there's something personal about the towers, and if thought that was a deliberate act, then I don't know.
Oh boy. Oh, Peter, it is always a pleasure to talk with you, and I know the listeners love you. And listeners get Unholy Alliance, Sinister Forces. Well, the trilogy is Sinister Forces, a grimoire of American political witchcraft. And that book has its own website, and it is sinisterforces.info. You can get all of Peter's work, The Angel and